Good evening, everyone. Whoops, I will actually use the new microphone. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that tonight's seminar is being held on Jandak, or Jaja Warren country, and invite everyone to pay their respects to Jara elders, past and present, and especially to any who are attending here tonight. Jandak has for thousands of years been cared for by Jara, and I thank them for sharing their beautiful country with us. So welcome everyone to the March session of Discovering History. And this includes those that are here in person and those who have tuned in to watch us from afar. Hello to everyone. My name is Susan Walter. I'm the Archives Coordinator of the Bendigo Regional Archives Centre here in Bendigo, at the Bendigo Library, where we share our passion for history and heritage. So tonight's speaker is David Waldron, an author and Associate Professor of History at Federation University, Australia. David specialises in folklore and community heritage. He is the author of Sign of the Witch, Modernity and the Pagan Revival, Shock, The Black Dog of Bungay, the case study in local folklore, and Snarls from the Tea Tree, Victoria's Big Cat folklore. He also edited and contributed to Goldfields and the Gothic, A Hidden Heritage and Folklore, and authored Arradale, The Making of a Haunted Asylum. His many talents and works spread over several mediums. They include a recent project in collaboration with the Wadawurrung people on the impact of colonisation on the Yarrowee River in Ballarat, which received a Magaley Award from Reconciliation Victoria. A role-playing game, The Demon of the Deep Leads, which plunges people into the wild and untamed goldfields of 1850s colonial Victoria, and one of Australia's most pervasive cryptic legends, also received an award. Tonight, David joins us in Bendigo to tell the tale of the intriguing Victorian historical figure, Lola Montez. So please welcome David, and without any further ado, I'll hand you over. Thank you.
I'd like to also acknowledge that we're on Djarawurrung land and acknowledge any elders past, present and emerging. I'm going to begin tonight's talk with an excerpt from the Bendigo Advertiser. It has fallen to the lot of few actors or actresses to perform on the stage to the close and appropriate accompaniment of real thunder and lightning. But such was the experience of Lola Montez when she was appearing before a large audience consisting mostly of diggers, on April 1st, 1856. During a heavy storm, lightning struck the theatre while Lola Montez was performing in Asmodeus, the Little Devil. And lightning struck the north side of the Criterion Theatre at the stage end. It made a breach nearly 3 feet in diameter near the eaves and passed through the roof at the opposite side of the building. No one was seriously hurt, but 2 or 3 people in the audiences were showered by flying splinters of wood. The gauzy scenery caught fire, women screamed, and everyone became frightened, except for Lola Montez. Amidst the greatest confusion, Lola approached the footlight and said, "I hope you ladies and gentlemen will not be afraid. I am not. This little devil is used to powder and ball. This is the first time, however, I have played the little devil with real thunder and lightning accompaniment. Previously, I had to put up with theatrical lightning, but it would appear that Bendigo folk would not be satisfied with mere stage effects. They must have the genuine stuff. However, no harm has been done, as you will see," pointing to the breach in the wall. "The lightning came through there, but the pieces of wood have gallantly fallen to my feet. You can now go home and say that you have seen the devil with genuine thunder and lightning." And this story begins. Hang on. So much for my stage effects. Lola and Bendigo. I looked and looked and looked for Coleman's Criterion Theatre and I could not find a picture. So if anyone finds one, let me know. This narrative begins with the exotic dancer Lola Montez, and she ventured here, of course, in the gold rush very famously in 1855 and 1856. And perhaps like the lightning that struck the Criterion Theatre, she set the goldfields aflame. For 2 years, she captivated audiences with her artistic performances, and this, of course, reached a fever pitch with her notorious spider dance. And in this act, supposedly, she appeared increasingly frantic as she attempted to dislodge a spider from her skirt. Yet there's multiple interpretations of what this dance actually was, including that it was a variation of the Italian dance, the tarantella. I'll mention she also has the privilege of baptizing a wreath here in Bendigo. And I'll give a quote from Bendigo Advertiser, April 9th, 1856, which is, think about it, not too long from the anniversary of where we are now. On appearing, she said she'd been all day out at Sailor's Gully where she'd baptised a reef, the Sydney Reef. She was down 170 feet underground and had been shouting and talking to diggers all day. So if she happened to be hoarse during her performance, they should blame the diggers and not her. And according to legend and the media of the day, diggers rewarded her performances with gold nuggets and showered her with gifts of gold jewellery, including, and this, if you can go down to Maryborough, please go down and see it, this particular piece. Presented Melbourne, December 28, 1855, to Madame Lola Montez by her friends in Victoria as proof of their esteem. And it's the only known piece of a large collection of Australian gold jewellery that she sold the following year in San Francisco on her return to the United States. Now, this picture, I've not seen a photo that actually does this justice. So go to Maryborough and see it in the Gold Museum there, because you see those little implements there, the little, the windlass and so on. They're actually tiny, tiny, tiny. It's a tiny, tiny little cup, a tiny, tiny little windlass, a tiny, tiny shovel that they've crafted. And of course, inlaid with rubies and so on. And it's, yeah, extraordinary. So please go and see it. And it's interesting when you think about this gift of gold and brooches. I'll read a little quote from the listing of this item by Linda Young. These brooches were gifts to women. The context of male to female gift giving situates these gold digger brooches in the discourse of gendered power, where women will display what men value in order for other people to look at it, and presumably them. Manufactured in Melbourne and the Goldfields town at the same time, they contested the orthodoxy of precious jewellery in its traditionally elite sphere by mobilising finely worked precious metals on the breasts of diggers' women to signify their achievements and consequent demand for acknowledgement of masculine luck and labour. The transition of diggers from the raucous culture of the goldfields to urban and suburban respectability may explain the long-hidden survival of these unorthodox jewels. But I find it funny, despite the significance of the gift, if you think about Mouse and the way in which the gift embodies the spirit of the giver and the context in which it's been given, and the way you accept the gift is all part of that ritual. The fact that Lola Montez chose to sell it is interesting because it, in a sense, removes that sense of ownership that the gifting of a gift implies. As I'm thinking about, the profound subversion of this, like I've encountered with my daughter and her mates sitting there working out what to do when, say, one of them wants to break up and suddenly he appears with an expensive necklace or something. And the problematic issues that emerge from these kinds of engagements. So it's the kind of rejection of that sense of ownership that traditional gender roles and proprietary, and this is something that Lola herself became famous for, as the woman who wouldn't be tamed, along with a sexualized legendary spider dance and various escapades that attracted the attention of the tabloid media in her era. And of course, dramatized time and time again in popular culture, music and literature. If you jump on Trove and type in Lola Montez, you'll see all these different images of ladies going around with whips and latex and all sorts of things. Like this. So she remains a compelling figure of study, not just for the spider dance, but for the cultural waves that she stirred across Australia at the time and what this says about gender relations in that era. She's even honoured in the Eureka series of the Royal Australian Mint. And of course, how do they portray her? She's there dancing, showing her legs with guys throwing nuggets at her. And it's interesting how she both scandalised audiences in 1856, creating this narrative of rebellion against social norms for women. And those performances still echo today with a fascinating blend of spectacle and moral controversy. Yeah, the interesting thing that comes from all this for me is, who was the historical Lola Montez? Is there any way in which we can lift this veil of popular culture and polarized representation to see the actual woman beneath. I recall an interview with Claire Wright where she talked about finding it interesting speaking to people in Germany about Lola Montez compared to Australia. In Australia, if they remember her, it is the lady who did the sexy spider dance who had gold nuggets thrown at her. She compares this with mentioning it in passing to a colleague in Germany who said, and I'll quote, that's the woman who led the People's Democratic Movement in Bavaria against the Jesuit-controlled monarchy. She was King Ludwig's lover and confidant. She was much feared for her political influence, and she was finally driven out of Bavaria. You found it quite astounding, that difference in representation. Lola Montez, Marie Dolores Eliza Rosanna Gilbert, born in 1821, was an Irish dancer, actress, and celebrity who performed under a Spanish moniker, the persona named Lola Montez. She became famous for her exotic dancing and her relationships with prominent men of her time, particularly, of course, King Ludwig I of Bavaria, which led to political turmoil in Bavaria due to her promoting liberal views and political reform. And indeed, she played a role in his eventual abdication in 1848. After his abdication, she continued her career as a performer, travelling throughout Australia and the United States. And she remains a notable figure in history for her adventurous and controversial life, as well, of course, as her impact on European politics, which is largely unknown. There we go. The level of interest that Lola Montez could generate on stage is evident in this particular account. I found this is an interesting one from California. Seldom is an actress or artist greeted with such a house as was the renowned Countess of Landesfeld last evening in the American. The building was literally stowed with human beings. The people were impatient until Lola Montez appeared in the character of Yelva. Her powers of pantomime were exhibited, and she portrayed the suffering of the orphan with a great deal of truthfulness and effect. And following this came the dance. The dance was what everyone had come to see, and there was an anxious flutter and intense interest as the moment approached. She was greeted with a storm of applause, and then she executed the dance, which is said to be her favourite and has won her much notoriety. The spider dance is a remarkable affair. It is thoroughly Spanish, certainly, and it cannot be denied that it is a most attractive performance. As a danseuse, Madame Lola is far above mediocrity. Some parts of her execution were truly admirable. She was heartily applauded and is likely to have fine success with us. Conversely, on the 19th of September, 1855, a night filled with anticipation, Lola Montez took stage at the Theatre Royal in Burke Street in Melbourne. And this performance would mark the end of her celebrated run in Australia, headlined by Lola Montez in Bavaria, the historical drama where she recounted her years as the Countess of Landesfeld and her life as the lover of King Ludwig I of Bavaria. But that night, it was not a title nor a love affair that held the audience's attention. It was the spider dance, a performance most captivating and controversial. The following day, the Argus, which had previously abstained from commenting on her performances, broke its silence, declaring, "After the exhibition of last evening, it would be criminal in our part to continue to be silent when such a course of conduct might be construed into a merely negative objection to such scenes as were presented by Madame Lola Montez. We feel called upon to denounce in terms of an unmeasured reprobation the performances which that lady last evening figured. We do not intend to dignify the event with details. The crowded attendants at the theatre will understand our motive for not doing so. One conclusion, however, at which we arrive is this. If the management of the Theatre Royal aims at securing public patronage by such performances, they have no right to insult respectable ladies by inviting their attendance. And as scenes of the kind are ever to be repeated, we consider that the interference of authorities is imperatively called for to put this down as a nuisance and utterly subversive of all ideas of public morality." What I find interesting is that's the same dance. Lola Montez herself, fearing that the piety and ultra-Puritanism of the conservative bastion, the Argus, might possibly operate to prevent the insertion of a letter in their columns, wrote a letter to the editor of the Herald. And she said there, "I do not perform the dance to minister any morbid tastes or immoral representations. I've always looked upon it as a work of high art, and it's on artistic grounds alone that I appear before the Melbourne public, as I have appeared in the same character before the most distinguished audiences in the world. And I throw back with scorn the insinuation of the Argus that I, in this dance, came forward to pander to the morbid tastes for indelicate representations. It is theirs that is the indelicacy, who look at any work of art with an arrière-pensée in their minds. Let them remember that the symbol of innocence is the statue of Eve, and since the days when Eve surveyed herself from the fountain, works of art, however betrayed, have by their very character been saved by the ribaldry of the licentious or uninitiated. Par example, the Venisi de Medici and Power's Greek slave. Oh, sorry. This is far from the first time Lola Montez had shocked the world with her spider dance. She'd been performing versions of it since her London debut in 1843, but for some reason in Melbourne and in Ballarat, the dance was not merely a performance, but it became a powerful statement. And I find it interesting that Bendigo also seemed fairly impressed with the dance on its artistic merit compared to Ballarat and Melbourne. And in a way, it seemed to embody defiance, created moral debates, and exposed the cultural anxieties of the era. In Ballarat, the story was even more notorious, as represented here in cartoons, with her feud with Henry Seekamp, editor of the Ballarat Times, which famously degenerated into physical combat with the use of a horsewhip, and of course has now become fetishized whenever you see Lola Montez. She's now a dominatrix with a whip and latex. A reading of eyewitness reports at the time, though, indicate that the conflict was actually far more physical than is usually imagined. Ah, there's another one. So I'll give you a report of the actual conflict with Henry Seekamp. Yesterday evening, Mr. Seekamp called at the United States Hotel, which adjoins the Victoria Theatre, and where this lady resides. And hearing that Mr. Seekamp was in the hotel, she came downstairs with a whip, which she'd drawn at a prize at the Fancy Bazaar a few days prior. And she laid it on him with a hearty goodwill. Mr. Seekamp retaliated with a riding whip, which he'd had in his hand, and ere long the combatants had held each other by the hair. Some of the parties present interposed, and they were separated, but not before neddies, which is a spiked club, and revolvers had been produced by the antagonists. Your files of the local paupers will put you in the possession of the details to which I've alluded. I need not say much more on the transaction, the more so as the parties engaged in the affair are both of them very eccentric and but little desirous to be judged by the ordinary rules of mortal men. As the quarrel now stands, Henry Seekamp says he will put Lola down by any means, and she says she will likewise put him down. And so this conflict and perception of her as a threat, just not to traditional notions of gender roles, but to people's marriages, came to a head when shortly afterwards she was assaulted by a miner's disgruntled wife, which is depicted, actually I'll go back one, on the right-hand side. They usually show the one with Seekamp, but they don't show the one with the miner's wife. And I'll talk about that a bit later, but she was actually quite seriously injured and had to be hospitalised from the injuries. So perhaps this related to her reputation as described in the Sydney Advertiser, and I quote, "Her figure was even more attractive than her face, lovely as the latter was. Lithe and graceful as a young fawn, every movement she made seemed instinctive with melody as she prepared to commence the dance. Her dark eyes blazed and flashed with excitement." Or perhaps as Aldous Huxley more crassly put it, when you meet Lola Montez, her reputation makes you automatically think of the bedroom. The perception of Lola Montez as a provocative dancer challenging public morality, as described in the Argus, became still strikingly relevant 150 years later, 170 years later indeed. Her spider dance, notorious for the boldness, was of course represented in New Gold Mountain. And I find quite fascinating that it's still a central part. If you go to Sovereign Hill, they have Lola Montez there every day. Now, she was there for a fortnight, but as far as Sovereign Hill is concerned and Ballarat's concerned, there she is every day being a staple of the Goldfields. My son had a great insight to this. He said, it's like if Taylor Swift came to Ballarat and in 2300 and we're flying around in our starships, everyone's going on about that time Taylor Swift came to Ballarat. And there's something to this. Sometimes we have these, major historical events in a small town. I'm reminded of speaking to the former Anglican vicar of Bungie, who wrote the book on the Black Dog of Bungie, and he said to me, it's the only thing that's ever happened in that town, and 400 years later, it's the only thing anyone will talk about. So Ballarat Provincial Hotel further immortalises her with its restaurant, Lola, honouring the dancer who scandalised and enthralled the gold diggers of Ballarat with her infamously erotic spider dance, is how it's labelled. And they have murals of Lola Montez and, of course, the staple in Sovereign Hill. And yet I find it interesting, we have these sorts of representations of Lola. That's costuming design from a 1950s film. Of course, we don't remember this Lola Montez. I find it interesting in Bendigo, the difference in representation. Here's another report of Lola Montez performing in Bendigo here. On Friday evening, a tolerable audience was present to witness the repetition of The Follies in the Night, in which Madame Lola Montez impersonated La Duchesse de Chartres. Few pieces in which Madame plays give her the opportunity of appearing to greater advantage than this performance. The interest is kept up through the whole piece, and when concluded, the sensations of incidents with which it is well provided is the only cause of regret to the spectator. Mr. Bias as the Duke was quite home in the character. The spider dance, which encored, concluded the evening's fabulous entertainment. Bendigo Advertiser, April 7th, 1856. Similarly, on Saturday, the house was crowded to see Madame Lola Montez for the first time performing The Lady of Lyons as Pauline. Many of the scenes were gone through by her in style which would reflect credit on any actress. The commencement of the closing scene in the last act, especially her impersonation of the character, was very good. Pauline's grief seemed real and palpable to the audience, and such as became the situation she was in. We must confess we are agreeably surprised to find this lady developing powers of a higher quality than merely those of a danseuse. In appearance, she has the advantage of realising that Pauline, who has inspired Claude with a passion of such power, and she fully identified and expressed herself with the character. So historian Claire Wright observes that while in Australia she's almost singularly known for licentious behaviour in the Ballarat Goldfields, as reported by the press at the time, in Europe, the memories of Lola are entirely different. And there she's remembered as the lover of the king, the bringer of reform, and the leader of a revolution. Kaz Cook, in introducing Lola's book, The Arts of Beauty and Hints to a Gentleman on the Art of Fascinating, refers to Lola Montez as the original guerrilla girl, celebrated across the globe in the 19th century as a fiery dancer, an adventurer, a violent temptress, and the lover of royalty, gorgeous, witty, and bold. And this very multifaceted legacy highlights Lola not as an iconic dancer, but also a figure of resilience and reinvention with an allure that transcends time and space. She also remained a woman who was conscious of the importance of her persona and worked to cultivate it as both a tactic, but also a means of survival. And I find it interesting when you look at this, sorry, that's the wrong one, The Arts of a Gentleman. This is a little quote, and I love the sass that Lola uses in writing this. I expect to win the gratitude of the entire masculine gender by these rules of the art of fascinating. It used to be supposed that this art belonged exclusively to my sex, but that was a vulgar error, which the sharp practice of men has long since exploded. It is now very well established that gentlemen spend far more time in inventing ways and means of attracting women and getting them to love them than women ever do in having to win the hearts of gentlemen. Lovemaking indeed seems to be the being end and aim of man. He appears to think he was born for no other purpose, and he devotes himself to the business with a zeal and enthusiasm highly honourable to his exalted genius and to his immortal station that he claims for himself as the Lord of all creation. So it's interesting, even today, cultural memories of Lola Montez are not only relevant, but contested. Following her Melbourne performances, some even talked about, reclaiming her identity, of course, as a political figure and artist and bold adventurer, while others still focus on her as a figure of spectacle and controversy. Now, this is amusing because I've ended up doing these talks on Lola Montez in part because of this. And this is like a mystery adventure game that comes from role-playing. Probably many of you aren't familiar with it. And this was actually came out of something I did as I created it for friends when we had an end of our podcast series, and one of our writers was going to Adelaide. And it was actually designed to be performed with Lola Montez running it. The actress who plays her in Sovereign Hill was going to run it. So we'd have Lola Montez actually investigating and working with our players. Now, the premise I had of this story was playing on Ballarat's conceit with Lola, that the descendants of Henry Seekamp were being tormented by a vampire Lola Montez who'd come back from the dead to pursue the family, with the eye that Ruby would have fun messing with them. And so there it goes. It was actually ended up being nominated for an international award, which amuses me greatly because it came out of something fun to do for a final party. When Thomas moved to Adelaide, he was previously doing our editing for the podcast. So there you go. It's also interesting as well because I published that and then everyone started telling me, oh, you must be a Volbeat fan. And I was like, what the hell's Volbeat? And Volbeat is a very popular band in Europe and the United States who have a hit song, Lola Montez. Feel the fire where she walks, Lola Montez so beautiful, the shady and tempered dame, blinding her eyes with a spider's dance, her performance utterly erotic and subversive to all ideas, and for public morality, as cool as she was, she didn't care. See the miner throw his gold, lifting her skirts, howling like a wolf, hell-raising and full of skin, Lola's dancing and showing her skin. So, out of all these layers, what the heck do we actually know about this lady who looms so large on the landscape of the Goldfields, particularly where Ballarat's still obsessed 170 years later, after a 2-week performance? What's going on? Who actually is she? The actual Lola. She was born on February 17, 1821, in Grange, Sligo Island, under the name, of course, Maria Dolores Eliza Rosanna Gilbert. She was the daughter of an ensign, Edward Gilbert, and his wife, who claimed descent from Spanish nobility. And following her father's death in 1824, her mother remarried John Craigie, later becoming an adjutant general in the British Army in India. Montez received her education in boarding schools in Britain and France. At 19, her mother arranged for her to marry an elderly judge, but instead she eloped with a young lieutenant, Thomas James, and wed him on July 23, 1837. However, their marriage soon encountered difficulties. And in 1839, James abandoned Montez for another woman while they were in Simla, India. She returned to England in 1842 and James obtained a judicial separation, citing claims of adultery on her behalf. She attempted to perform as an Irish woman, but found herself faced with boos and derision. And as Seymour notes in his biography of Lola Montez, Spain and Spanish culture were very much in fashion. Even the greatest ballerinas of the age, including Fanny Isler, Maria Taglioni, Fanny Cerrito, would introduce Spanish boleros and fandangos in their repertoires. And Lola wrote that she engaged a Spanish dancing master in London to teach her Spanish dances, and she went to Spain for 4 months to learn the language. And this trip also allowed her to escape legal prosecution in Ireland from behalf of her estranged husband. She procured a Spanish teacher and she studied with him and then had a visit to Montevallis in Spain, came back to London, and then made her debut with a new persona as a Spanish noblewoman, Lola Montez. And something I found really interesting when you read discussions of her and her performances at that time, Théophile Gaultier, after meeting her in Paris in 1844, noted that for a Spanish noblewoman, she spoke Spanish very poorly, no more than a tourist might. And thinking of myself last year in Mexico trying to get by with Duolingo Spanish, I can imagine what that would be like. And in fact, he commented on her saying, the only thing Andalusian about Mademoiselle Lola Montez is her magnificent black eyes. She speaks Spanish very indifferently, French hardly at all, and English passably. Which is her country? That is the question. There we go. Lola Montez, Countess Mansfield. Attracting the eye of King Ludwig I of Bavaria in her new persona, she became his mistress in 1846, and she wielded considerable political influence for a period, influencing ministerial appointments and garnering support from radical university students. However, this provoked a public backlash, leading to riots against her on February 7, 1848, and culminating in Ludwig's abdication. And faced with evidence of her background and scandalous claims of affairs, she was forced to flee to Switzerland and then to Australia. In a sense, Europe became too hot to hold her. 1855, Lola Montez appointed a young actor named Noel Follen as a manager, and then they embarked on a journey to Australia aboard the Fanny Major, accompanied by their own theatrical company. Arriving on August 16, they debuted at the Royal Victoria Theatre in Sydney with Lola Montez in Bavaria. And 2 weeks later, Lola and Folland abruptly left, prompted by the pursuit of a sheriff's officer with a debtor's warrant of arrest. Now, apparently, she put off the arresting officer by stripping naked in her hotel room, causing him to retreat. And then she left to go to Victoria. You notice in this picture, it shows the priest praying and the men aren't able to do their work because Lola's distracting them because her dancing's too sexy. And then, of course, coming to Ballarat, as we've already discussed, and having her dispute. It was leaving Ballarat in April. She then continued much more successfully in Bendigo, Castlemaine, and other Victorian towns. And then she went to San Francisco with Folland. Near Fiji, on July 8th, Folland was mysteriously lost overboard with no investigation into his disappearance. And what's kind of interesting here is some of the papers talked about the tragedy, and indeed she used some of the money of the jewellery she sold in San Francisco to pay for his funeral. Other papers speculated that there was foul play. And I have no idea. One can imply, and this is all about speculation and ingrained prejudice. I found this story in Castlemaine quite fascinating in giving a sense of her character. After describing it says here, the chief attraction was the celebrated spider dance, about which so much has been said and so much curiosity felt. At its conclusion, Lola was rapturously encored. And after a minute or two, she appeared in front of the stage, and whilst thanking the assembly for their kind appreciation of her efforts, she hoped they would excuse her non-compliance with their request for an encore as she was fatigued from travelling and her recent performances in Bendigo. She was going on to speak of Seville as the place of her birth when there was some interruption from the audience, which was construed into contempt for herself and which drew an indignant denunciation of her opponent, which she stigmatized as no man and a coward. And this led to a scene in which cheers were mixed with boos and hisses, and they were strangely blended. Lola then gave the disturbers a lecture, telling them they ought to respect themselves, their friends, and the friends of Madame Lola Montez in her performance. And she said she was as rich as any of them. She was worth over £70,000 and didn't give a pin for any of them. Another scene ensued during which Lola complained of the ill-natured treatment she'd experienced, which was met with cries of, "It's only one or two of us and we've paid you 10 shillings each." This seemed to add fresh fuel to Lola's fire. She did not care, she said, for their 10 shillings, and she claimed that she conferred an honour rather than received any distinction by dancing at all. On her return to the United States, she started to become quite ill, which some people have speculated might have been tertiary stage syphilis. It may have been another ailment. Part of the problem is there's so much polarized, scandalous material, it's difficult to tell which. She faced several setbacks trying to revive her career across several American cities. And then she started a series of lectures in 1857, authored by the Reverend Charles Chauncey Burr. And despite showing signs of genuine remorse, she was already quite ill by that stage. And she died at the age of 39, 1861, and was laid to rest in Greenwood Cemetery, Brooklyn, under the name Eliza Gilbert. But for all that, there's so much that we don't know. She's a cipher in our imagination. As one of my PhD students who's doing a big data project on Lola Montez at the moment, we're sort of correlating all the newspaper articles and so on together in a system. It's essential to approach these reports with skepticism. Lola Montez noted in her own autobiography, and I'll quote, She has the honour, I believe, of having caused more newspaper paragraphs and more biographies than any woman living. I have myself, that is Lola Montez, seen 23 or 24 biographies of Lola Montez, not one of which came any nearer to being a biography of me than it did to being an authentic history of the man on the moon. But then even in her own autobiography, she employed a great deal of creative license and deception, claiming, for instance, I was born in Seville in 1823. My father was a Spanish officer in the service of Don Carlos. My mother, a lady of Irish extraction, born in Havana, and married for a second time to an Irish gentleman, which I suppose is the cause of people speculating on my Irishness and sometimes Englishness. It's interesting, this tendency for inaccuracy surrounding the details of her life was not solely the work of her detractors. A common theme is her own role in complicating the matter. As Horace Wyndham states, Lola Montez deceived the public about herself and others deceived the public about Lola Montez. And he added, the inaccuracy of biographies in this fascinating woman have persisted largely because she was such an incorrigible liar. James Morton pointed out that numerous inaccuracies surrounding her, attributing them because, quote unquote, she told so many people so many lies. And so there's this sort of resistance to creating any positivist notion of her character, resulting in a contest of interpretations that we see today. Even when she was alive, it was noted that, and I quote, the Lola Montez of reality is a very different person from the Lola Montez of notoriety. Her entree was modest and elegant, and throughout her performance, she played with a mingled fervour, grace, playfulness, and pathos that fully gained the favour of all. We glory in the boldness of the woman who challenges her tale to be gainsaid. She not only vindicates her character during the career, but appeals to history to conform her sentiment. Her enduring presence in Australian culture since her tour is particularly significant given the broader trend of neglecting women in Australian history. In their collection of biographies, Marilyn Lake and Farley Kelly highlight that fame and achievement of problematic questions when raising issues such as why are there so few famous women in Australia and what makes these women exceptional? To what extent has a privileged class position been a prerequisite for any achievement? Margaret Anderson notes, for instance, and I quote, perhaps the most celebrated international performer to visit the Goldfields, where she was a sensation. But the controversy surrounding her tour underscores the moral standards that Victorian women faced and reminded them that the freedom of the Goldfields was mostly reserved for men. Thus, she stands out as an extraordinary figure for women in the 1850s Goldfields, offering new and alternative interpretations of feminine identity, and in a sense, no doubt did so when she was alive. Despite her popularity in the years following tours, engaging with her in an academic sense has actually been quite rare. Marilyn Lake argues until the 1970s, the writing of Australian history has been marked by the absence of women. And this is no accident, nor an easily corrected oversight. History as a public record of men's deeds rested on, in fact, requires the invisibility of women. And Patricia Grimshaw echoes this as well, suggesting that academic historians have produced many interpretations of the past across liberal, left-wing and conservative narratives, but they share one commonality, an almost complete neglect of women's experiences. And this highlights a particular context for Lola Montez in understanding the past, and in particular the popular memory which she thrives, and academia where she's overlooked. She consistently attracted polarised press coverage, largely due to her pervasive celebrity status reflected in nearly every account of her life, including her own. During her time in Australia, she experienced both performative triumphs and setbacks, faced the dissolution of numerous professional partnerships, and enduring the heartbreaking loss of her married lover, actor Frank Folland, on a return journey to the United States. Or alternately, if you want to read the tabloid take, played a nefarious hand in his disappearance. Take your pick. So in the realm of fame and intense pop culture representations surrounding her, locating the true identity of Lola Montez is a complex challenge. It's a very slippery one. The polarised press coverage and notoriety she experienced often overshadowed her personal narrative, making it difficult to discern who she was beyond the sensationalised persona. And we just get little segments of this when they quote her verbatim in the papers and so on at various events, as I've tried to illustrate today. And Lola herself grappled with this, as many people thrust into the spotlight of fame do. Caught between public expectations and her authentic self, perhaps lost in a sea of notoriety. The disparity between her image as a celebrated artist and the reality of her life reflects a broader theme in the lives of all those who attain global popularity, including the aforementioned Taylor Swift. Perhaps Claire Wright best sums this up in her comment that, and I quote, "The real question is, do we as a nation still need to cast Lola in the role of an eternal good time girl? Does the image of Lola as a blousy flirt still convey socially relevant information? Is it possible to view her as a whole person, a complicated, conflicted woman, both powerful and persuasive, but also craving respect and attention?" And thank you very much. I guess any questions? What's the time like? Not too bad.
We can do questions. I have one.
Yeah.
You mentioned before that she came to Australia. Did she come straight from Bavaria to Australia?
She came
or
via Switzerland.
Through Switzerland.
Yeah.
Do you think some of her popularity in Australia was to do with the fact that there were many others who came to Australia because of the 1848 revolutions? The Swiss Italians ended up in the witch.
I very much think that's the case. Yeah.
All right.
And I think that's where you also get the context of people like Raffaello Carboni and so on as well. Yeah.
If there's any questions on Zoom, please type them in now. Any questions in person?
I'm just interested in the photo a couple of slides back.
Yeah.
One more. That one on the left. Is
Yes.
that her?
No, that's an actress portraying her.
Okay, thank you. She's pretty gorgeous, whoever
Yeah.
she is.
Yeah. Which is, in a sense, part of the point I'm trying to make, finding the real woman through all the representations. Yeah.
So 1848 was a year that had, as you said, revolutions all across Europe. Was the one in Bavaria the first one? Is she a very consequential figure in world history? Because
I would
she
argue so, yeah.
sparked
Yeah.
it all?
Well, you think about the Bavarian Revolution, that's, yeah, in a sense, the wellspring of those challenges of the old Catholic-dominated monarchies of Europe. And of course, that leads into, German unification, 30 years later.
And I'll just say the first time I came across Lola Montez was in the novel Royal Flash.
Oh, yeah.
By George MacDonald Fraser, where she is a character. And there was also a movie, Royal Flash, with Malcolm McDowell in it. And I can't remember who the actress who played Lola Montez was, but she definitely played into all the tropes you were talking about, the way she's portrayed.
I found interesting in New Gold Mountain, they give her a trait that whenever she gets angry or agitated, her accent slips. Which is, yeah.
Any other questions?
Most of what's written about her is written by men. Is she known to have had female friends?
Not much that I know of. Draw from that what we will. Yeah.
I'm just wondering how long she was in Bendigo for, if she was in Ballarat for 2 weeks.
I'm
was she
not
here a bit
specifically sure.
longer?
It seemed about the same, about a fortnight or so, yeah.
How many gold nuggets did she get in?
I don't know. I don't know. She certainly encouraged people to throw gold nuggets. Whether they did or not, I don't know. But she certainly got that a very impressive brooch, which is quite large.
Now, I can't for my life remember the lady's name, but there was a noted phrenologist in Bendigo approximately the same time, give or take 5 years or so, who also got herself into trouble and was quite notorious. She did a tour.
Madam Sibley?
That's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she went to Ballarat and that as well. She, I think I actually recall her going to court and it was revealed that she was Cornish and her French identity was a persona. I should just mention while I'm here, of course, we've got this event coming out in Castlemaine, 16th, 18th of May, not long away, celebrating our golden heritage, the alchemy of gold. One of my PhD students is heavily involved in that, Derek Reed, so go and see it. Yeah, Madam Sibley is a very interesting character, a mesmerist and phrenologist and hypnotist and so on. Yeah.
my favorite story with a Bendigo one, where she forgot to pay one of the guys that she was hypnotizing, and turns out he was underage, under 21 at the time, and was illegally employed by her. And she had to pay a big fine and skipped out on the fine. But I'm wondering more about the comparison between the two of them.
Yeah. There certainly was a case of Irish and Cornish women pretending to be exotic for their careers. That comes up quite a bit.
Did other international acts, so to speak, come to places like Ballarat and Bendigo?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like, for instance, the later part of the century, you get a lot of international spiritualists like Jessie Shepherd. Dr. Henry Slade, for instance, came out doing essentially it's stage magic but performed as a seance. Henry Slade's an interesting one. It's a bit later than this, but it was interesting. Henry Slade, you see photos of him with his big handlebar mustache and so on, but he was found to have female genitalia and breasts on his ship back to the United States. There's a lot of interesting eccentric characters involved.
We've got about a dozen people watching on Zoom. We've got a comment from Mark saying, thanks, it was a fascinating presentation. How many British women posing as French and Spanish noble women were there?
I think perhaps quite a bit. It certainly comes up with, the fortune tellers and so on pretending to have alternate ethnic identities. It's actually an area that I'm particularly interested in research is folk magic and witchcraft and the gold rush. And one of the things you get there is in the earlier part of the gold rush, their market is to poor women, predominantly women, who are interested in connecting with folk remedies and so on they grew up with in rural parts of Britain. And then in the 1860s, as we start to get a rising middle class, they switch to creating these alternate Romany, French, Spanish exotic personas, and then marketing to upper class people. And then you start to see more of the stuff like tarot cards and things like that. And so there's this interesting dynamic. As Lola found, though, an Irish woman could not make success as a performer, but a Spanish woman could.
What made her so much more successful than all the others who were masquerading?
I think her performance, her skills in performance, she had a larger than life personality by all accounts, and it just captured the public imagination. I find fascinating, though, you see some people talking about a spider dance as if it's watching a stripper show, and some people talking about the spider dance as if it's high art. And I find that
That's
fascinating.
the difference between Bendigo and Ballarat.
Yeah, Bendigo, Ballarat, Melbourne, and it's in California. It's like watching ballet. In Ballarat, it seemed like you're, I don't know, watching the full Monty or something. It's actually quite interesting because it's not really clear what that dance specifically was. My student Marcus speculates it's the tarantella, and that she's misunderstood the word to think of the word tarantulas for spider in Spanish. But I don't actually know. And there's some discussion of, flicking like if there's a spider in a skirt, or are they misinterpreting a dance move they're not familiar with.
Thanks, everyone. Can we please give another clap to David? Feel free to hang around and ask David any questions if you'd like. Sue, are you doing the next Discovering History seminar or in May? Yeah. Do you want to say anything about it, you or Desiree? No?
Yeah. Thanks, Geordie. Yes, so 1st of May, we've got a new launch of a new guide to Victoria's court records that were held in the Archive Centre here. So it's exploring the range of records, what they contain, the stories inside them. We've got, I'm giving a talk, Desiree's launching the guide, and we've also got Trevor Budge, who's representing City of Greater Bendigo on the law and order side of the World Heritage bid for Victoria as well. So if you're interested, same time, same place, 1st of May. Thank you.